I'm Melissa Cobb. Come fly with AOPA. Well, this time of year, pilots have the opportunity to help be Santa's elves. And AOPA pilot senior features editor Julie Summers Walker had the opportunity to fly along with pilots spreading cheer to those who live in the Navajo Nation in New Mexico.
The landscape here is beautiful, yet rugged, just like the people who call it home. The Navajo people have inhabited this land for generations, but they face many hardships.
I think that the unemployment rate is running at somewhere around 48%. You know, the average income per year is like less than $9,000 a year. When you have generations of family all living within a small hogan, in many cases without running water, without heat, and you know, the basic essentials that most of this country fortunately takes for granted, but not within the nature of the Navajo Reservation.
Every year, general aviation pilots from across the Southwest collect donations and fly them from their local airports to the Navajo Nation.
This is the Navajo Christmas Airlift. It's 37th year. This was started by my parents back in 1984. My dad had only been flying for a couple of years. He wanted to look for something to do that would be community service oriented, combine that with the flying activities. And my mother worked for the state of Arizona and had contacts all across Arizona. And so between the two of them, they developed an arrangement with Navajo Social Services at Window Rock. And that first year, a total of 8 aircraft participated.
This year, dozens of airplanes and pilots delivered a giant pile of supplies: clothing, blankets, gifts, toys, and other essentials. The supplies are put in plastic bags to maximize the space in the aircraft.
I believe that we exceeded 12,000 pounds this year. Looking at that pile today, which was so intimidating and awe-inspiring.
It's a clear picture of the generosity of the general aviation community.
My goodness, you know, there's just so many people in aviation with, you know, God bless them, such a great heart. And I believe it's primarily a way for the aviation community to speak up and say that they care.
Over the coming months, all the supplies will be distributed across the nation by the Southwest Indian Foundation.
People are always grateful. You know, you can see relief for a lot of families, especially around Christmas time. That's when we try to get those things out there. You know, just even on a practical level, things like, oh, we needed a coat, and here comes a coat, you know, for the kids. Those things mean a lot to people.
I consider myself a steward to the mission that my parents started. And it's really just out of, you know, that love of family and what they did, and then the love of the Navajo people that extended beyond it.
Well, Julie, you seek out giving back stories across the country, and at this time of year, I'm sure there's no shortage. So, you know, for future years, how can pilots get involved? Where are some of the locations that do these kind of events spreading cheer?
Well, you're right, Alyssa. One of my favorite things to do as a writer and a journalist for AOPA is to get out there and find these great giving back stories. And they can range anywhere from Angel Flight and Light Hawk and South Wings. They can do everything from, you know, transporting patients to getting doctors and nurses to care places in different parts of the country. But yes, the most fun is at Christmas time, and to go out there and watch the pilots stuff their airplanes full of packages. And sometimes it's goods that people need, like out in the Navajo Nation. But a couple of years ago, we did one in Michigan, and that was all toys. And we went the entire state of Michigan, and I got the privilege to fly in one of the aircraft stuffed behind a couple presents and a bicycle or two. Yeah, you can find these. We've been finding them all over the country. And actually, I'd like to use the show a little bit here to plead that anybody has a great story, we'd love to come out and cover it. But I've heard of, up in Maine, there's a Santa Claus drop that they go out to the islands in Maine in helicopters. Certainly down in Florida, there are a lot of Christmas drops and things like that. So it's a wonderful, incredible, fantastic thing that pilots do to give back to their communities.
All right. Thanks, Julie. Well, Merry Christmas to you. You look like you're in the Christmas spirit.
Merry Christmas.
Well, here's some good news just in time for the holidays. Some of you might remember the controversial FAA policy change in 2021 that requires pilots and their flight instructors to get a letter of deviation authority, that's a LODA, in order to give or receive flight instruction in all experimental aircraft. That meant that you couldn't even get your flight review in your own experimental aircraft without getting a LODA first. Well, thanks in part to AOPA's advocacy work, a National Defense Authorization Bill includes language that will eliminate the FAA's new LODA requirement. That bill has passed the House and the Senate, and as we record this, it's awaiting signature on President Joe Biden's desk. Well, there's good news for helicopter pilots as well, especially helicopter pilots in New York. Governor Kathy Hochul recently vetoed a bill called Stop the Chop. The bill was originally intended to mitigate helicopter operations at the West 30th Street heliport, but instead it would have allowed citizens to sue pilots and other company personnel for alleged helicopter noise pollution statewide. A rather mysterious aircraft crash occurred near the North Pole recently. The AOPA Air Safety Institute provides an early analysis of this peculiar holiday accident.
Let's take an early look at the curious accident that happened up around the North Pole region. The accident thankfully didn't end in any fatalities, but it could have been so much worse. The aircraft involved is a bit mysterious. It has 9 separate engine pods, apparently, that are independently fed. The flight began from an undisclosed location near the North Pole. The pilot took off, and almost immediately we can see from ADS-B tracks erratic aircraft behavior. There's a series of turns in either direction. There's some climbs and descents. The pilot does seem to gain control and climb out, but then shortly thereafter, he'll turn back towards the airport in an attempt to turn back and come back to the airport for whatever reason. The pilot's able to manipulate himself to get on final. The final is nowhere near a stabilized approach. The pilot comes in, lands the aircraft hard. It tumbles into a runway excursion, and packages are seen strewn across the runway and the landing environment. We can hear from these radio transmissions from liveatc.net the final transmissions of what was a demanding flight.
Toy Sled 1, North Pole departure, radar contact, climb and maintain 10,000. Ho, ho, ho! Donner! Blitz! Come on, faster! Ho, ho, ho!
In trying to recreate the flight, there are some odd things about this flight from the very start. First, the erratic behavior of the aircraft after takeoff seems to indicate the potential for the aircraft being overloaded. That's somewhat reinforced by the eyewitness accounts we have, which say the pilot was throwing glittery objects from the aircraft as it was going through its erratic flight profile. This suggests that a potential cause for this mishap is a weight and balance consideration. Much too early for us to make that call, but it's certainly something the NTSB should look into. The pilot and pilot proficiency is certainly something the NTSB will look at. From what we can ascertain, the last time the aircraft flew, a TS-9R aircraft, was on December 24th of last year. In the interim, it's unclear if the pilot, known as Nicholas or Chris, had flown in between, and his CFI, known locally as Mama Claus, was unavailable for comment and refused any kind of interviews with us or the NTSB. Another theory regarding this mishap is a loss of thrust. So the TS-9R apparently has 9 separate thrust pods, each of which are independently fed. Whether or not the pilot's proficiency in maintaining control of the aircraft, if one or more of those thrust pods were to fail, is unknown. But it's certainly easy to understand how that aircraft would go out of control if one or more thrust pods failed and the pilot wasn't ready to deal with it. Another potential for this accident is VFR into IMC. The conditions are certainly a factor for this mishap. It was a dark night, blowing snow conditions. Why the pilot decided to take off was unclear in the first place. We understand that apparently he was preparing for a larger mission later this month, but the details behind that have been vague from the start of the investigation. But if the pilot in fact took off in such challenging conditions, why the pressure to take off is unknown, and it certainly could have been a VFR into IMC mishap. VFR into IMC anytime is problematic. VFR into IMC at night is especially problematic and especially demanding. In this case, the TS-9R is equipped with a bright red light on the front of one of the thrust pods. Apparently, the light is powered by biological process. It's unknown whether or not that red light was working. Eyewitness reports don't indicate any kind of a red light, which is a key factor for the TS-9R being visible and being able to provide the pilot visibility in low light conditions. A final theory on this mishap is the pilot's fitness to fly. Apparently, there were holiday celebrations the night before the flight that went well into the night and into the early morning. And early NTSB reports are that a chocolatey substance was found on the seat of the aircraft, and cookie crumbs and sugary substances were spread throughout the aircraft. That's certainly something the NTSB will look hard at in their investigation. Was the pilot fit to fly? There's a lot more to learn about this mysterious mishap. Until the NTSB finishes its investigation, there's still some takeaways that all of us GA pilots can learn from. First, when it comes to holiday flying, there's always a lot of emotional pressure on us as pilots to get there and be with our families, and we have a strong desire to be there and be with our families. But we have to make sure we're objective and make the right go, no-go decision. And then to realize that holidays bring a lot of fatigue, emotional fatigue and physical fatigue. We're typically working long hours to wrap work up to be done for the holidays. We've done a lot of shopping and other activities, sometimes some festivities, some parties, and we just need to make sure that we're getting the proper rest so we're ready to take the flight, especially if it involves IFR conditions. Fly safe this holiday season. Thanks for watching.
All right, well, thanks for that analysis. Well, I hope all of you enjoyed this episode of Fly with AOPA. Be sure to like and subscribe so you can stay up to date on all our latest videos. This week, we leave you with some footage from viewer Gilles Roy. He's flying over La Quinta and Salton Sea areas of California. Well, be sure to send in your favorite flying videos at the link in the description. You just might see them on an upcoming show. And as always, if you're not already an AOPA pilot, we'd love for you to join us. Click the link at the end of the video to learn more.